Welcome back, fight fans. We are here for the final show of 2020. I know I said it last week when we had Adam Hunter on the podcast, but we have one more to skid in here. I am your host, as always, Riley Kontek here for Shootin' the Shit podcast. This week, we are going to do an award show for 2020, as well as a predictions for 2021 show. And joining me is, I guess I'd call him my boss over at Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. He's also with SureDog.com. And he's actually who got me working for Loudmouth in the first place. Keith Shillan. Keith, it's been a while. How you been?
It's been great. It's tough, though, because I have to follow up Adam Hunter. Like, that's impossible to do. So I appreciate being, the Cam Newton to Tom Brady. Like, I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was a big get for us. I mean, some of the biggest guys we've had on the show, definitely Adam Hunter. Jake Shields was a big get this year. We had a lot of great guests on the show. So we close out the 2020 with the worst guest we're probably going to have on the show. Oh, that's probably not true. I forgot Quiggins was on the show, so that he takes the cake there. And oh, that's wet over there. Oh, that's not a good thing. All right, so like we were talking about, this is going to be an award show. We have, I believe, 9 or 10 categories here. And then at the end of the show, me and Keith are going to look division by division for the UFC, and we're going to make predictions of who is going to be champion once 2021, by the end of 2021, we'll say, just based on the information we have. Obviously, we don't know the matchups or anything like that now. And then we'll sign off for the year, and then you'll see us back in 2021. So let's get to the first category. How we'll do it is I will name a couple of fighters who come up in the conversation as either the fighter of the year, the knockout of the year, etc. I'll float it to Keith, and I'll give my rebuttal if I agree with him. Obviously, that's the case. So first up, we have fighter of the year. We'll start from the highest weight class down. The top 4 guys that seem to be getting the votes is UFC light heavyweight champion Jan Blachowicz, who obviously won the belt this year. Israel Adesanya, the middleweight champion. He was in contention. Welterweight breakout star Khamzat Chimaev, and then the UFC flyweight champion Davison Figueroa. So Keith, it could be somebody I didn't even mention there. Who did you have as your 2020 fighter of the year?
Well, one guy that didn't get mentioned that was a consideration was Kevin Holland, being
True.
that he won 5 fights, really did it in it's like 7 or 8 month window, which is pretty impressive. But to me, to win fighter of the year is you don't always have to win the title, and in 2020. I think this would definitely be the year for having an exception because of such a lack of shows. But generally speaking, you probably need a champion. I'm going to go with the flyweight champion, Davison Figueroa. Now, he's the only guy that got a draw on it, but he also had 3 wins. He had 3 stoppages. He beat a legend in Joseph Benavidez. He won the title. He defended the title. He has a fight of the year candidate, which I'm sure you're going to mention, against Brandon Moreno. And if it wasn't for a judge that scored the 5th round for Moreno, which almost everybody else on planet Earth scored for Davison Figueroa, this is a guy that would have went 4-0 for the year. And on top of that, he headlined 4 cards. And he fights in a division that was not that long ago. We were talking about completely eliminating the division to turn around and headline 4 cards. And let's not mention also defend the title. He didn't win, but to successfully fight in 3-week period in 2 fights, it was just an absolutely incredible year for the Brazilian.
Yeah, I think he's hands down, and like you said, even though he had the draw, hands down. I mean, no UFC champion has ever defended a belt 3 weeks after defending it. I think that's true. I agree with you. I do believe he defeated Moreno in that fight. The draw. I'm not going to get in a tiss about it. I'm looking forward to the rematch. It's going to be immediate. So yeah, I agree with you. I think Davison Figueroa wins. And I think you made a really good point that a flyweight, even when Demetrius Johnson, who's the greatest of all time at flyweight, was in the UFC, he wasn't even headlining the cards. And Figueroa, like you said, was headlining cards as a flyweight champion. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's much argument to that. Now, if there's a runner-up for fighter of the year, would you take Kevin Holland in that instance?
That's tough. I think I might go with Jan Blachowicz because I need that title, and I think he was an underdog against Dominic Reyes. I like Dominic Reyes. I think I picked Dominic Reyes to win by knockout, so it was an upset. I also think of that moment where he's walking through the airport and his whole country shows up to celebrate him. Kevin Holland didn't have that kind of moment, and to me, what was Kevin Holland's best win? A 40-something-year-old Jacare. Like there's levels to your fighter of the year, like your level of competition. If like this was like college football, like that wouldn't get him in the playoff. Like that wasn't enough strength of schedule. So I'd probably go with Jan Blachowicz. But to be honest, I didn't really think that deep in like what you put out. We're gonna do fight of the year. Figueredo was the one that just jumped to my mind. So I didn't really dig down their records.
Absolutely, and yeah, and as you said, Davison was such a hands down guy that there was really no I mean, honestly, there was nobody. Now we'll talk about a guy later, I'm sure, who was in consideration that had an outstanding year as well. But let's get to the next award here. We have fight of the year. Some of the ones that come to mind: Poirier, Hooker, like the guy we just talked about, Figueiredo and Moreno, Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk, which. That felt like it happened so long ago because that happened before COVID-19 really shut the whole thing down, but that did happen in 2020. Unless I didn't mention something, what was your fight of the year this year, Keith?
So this is two categories in a row that to me that this is an absolute runaway winner. If you've listened to me talk on this network at all, you know that my fight of the year is Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Everybody's saying it's the greatest female fight in history. Besides that, if we were giving out rounds of the year, all 5 of the rounds could be nominations. Like they were that good. It was that competitive. Like some of the other matches you mentioned wasn't as close to competitive. I remember sitting there when they were, about to announce the decision and having no clue who was going to win. Look across the board. Most people on Twitter and stuff felt the same way. Like could go either way. Some of the other things I think of is the damage that was done. I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, if you look at a picture of Joanna Jędrzejczyk before the fight and then after, or just showed a picture of Joanna Jędrzejczyk with that damage with the swelling of her like forehead and say, which fighter is this? Like, I wouldn't pick her if I didn't know ahead of it. It's that much damage. The other thing is that I don't think gets enough credit is how much the insane output of these two women. Mm-hmm. I was looking up the stats. Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who lost, landed 186 significant strikes. I want to compare that to like some of the all-time greatest fights. Some people call Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald the greatest fight in UFC history, MMA history. It's like it's in the conversation.
Yep.
As John Franklin used to say, it's in the at least whether if you want to crown it, it's at least in the club. Mm-hmm. Joanna Jędrzejczyk landed more strikes in that fight than Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald did combined in their fight. There wasn't a single lull in action. Like there's moments in other great fights, there's actually lulls. It wasn't in that fight. People call it the greatest female fight of all time. I think they might be underselling it. It might be just the greatest fight of all time. I know I'm going bold with that, but it's at least, as I go back to my buddy John Franklin says, it's at least in the club.
Yeah, for sure. I don't disagree with that. I think that the fight was amazing. I remember watching it live and just being like, dude, this is a fight right here. And, one of my favorite fights of all time is Dan Henderson, Shogun Rua. And that's the fight it reminded me of, honestly, when I was watching it. I was just like, I feel like I'm watching like Lady Shogun fighting Lady Dan Henderson right now. And I agree with you. I think this was a runaway this year. I think this was hands down the best fight. I think Figueiredo and Moreno gave him a run, late in the year here. But no, I went back and watched that fight when I was looking over these categories, and I absolutely Weili Zhang and Joanna Champion, because I don't want to keep butchering her name like I've known to do on this show. I think that was hands down fight of the year.
I just want to back up a second. You mentioned Dan Henderson, Shogun Rua, which is one of the greatest fights of all time. Mm-hmm. Don't forget that same night, at the same exact time, was Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler 1, which is probably the best fight in Bellator history, and also one of the greatest fights, happened on the same night, which is insane.
Yep, yeah, and I remember that too, man. I remember exactly where I was for that fight too. So, and they had him on both TVs, luckily. All right, so I think that's a hands down champion there. Now we're gonna get to another one, which is probably gonna be unanimous. Me and Keith are known for arguing with each other on this network, and so far we've been very on the same page here. And I think it's probably gonna continue in this category. Knockout of the year, the ones that are mentioned, obviously the Joaquin Buckley knockout earlier in the day. Mamed Khalidov, it looked like he was gonna get the knockout of the year at KSW. Kevin Holland's knockout of Jacare was pretty incredible. Cody Garbrandt over Rafael Assunção. I mean, is there any argument on this one, Keith?
No. So one thing I always want to like check myself, and we do this naturally as Americans. We have a North American bias where Fight of the Year usually comes out of the UFC. Fight of the Year, like we kind of tend to go with the major North American. Like usually, most of the categories go to the UFC. Bellator might steal one or two. I want to go elsewhere, but this is not one of those ones that's a bias.
No.
Impa Kasanganai's knockout of, Joaquin Buckley's knockout of Impa Kasanganai is one of the greatest knockouts ever. Might be the greatest knockout ever.
Yeah. Just
the amount, regardless of the skill set, because obviously all these crazy knockouts are always those like, oh my God, you jump out of the seat. But the reaction, I mean, there's 65 million views on the tweet that the UFC's tweeted out. I mean, Kanye West wrote a song about, or I'm not sure if he wrote a whole song or a line.
It's probably a verse or something.
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't really follow Kanye West, but like he put it in a song. I mean, this was a prelim fight in the UFC. To me, it was absolutely insane. And Buckley is no matter where he goes in the UFC, if he just absolutely fails, doesn't win another fight, he will always be in every highlight forever in the UFC.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, my brother doesn't follow the sport very religiously, but he saw it on SportsCenter's top 10, and the first thing he did was text me. He goes, "I'm assuming you saw that fight tonight." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "The knockout from that black dude." And I said, "Yes, yeah, of course, that was the greatest knockout I think I've seen. It's up there with Uriah Hall's The Ultimate Fighter knockout, which was incredible.
Sure.
There's so many. My personal favorite knockout of all time, Dan Henderson over Michael Bisping, just from the pure viciousness. But I mean, to land that, it is so, everything has to be perfectly aligned for that to happen. The timing has to be correct, the balance has to be correct, and then the accuracy with which he connected had to be perfect. And it was. And that was one of those times where I was watching it on my laptop, and I reacted so crazily that I actually threw the laptop off, and I barely caught it with my hand. I was about to flick it off onto the ground. That's how, jaw-dropping that knockout was.
Yeah, crazy. And the funny thing think about the star that has made Buckley. Yeah. Buckley's going into fights now, and everyone's talking about this crazy knockout machine and a killer machine. He went into this fight as the big, not a huge underdog, but he was a pretty sizable underdog in this fight. Mm-hmm. He was supposed to lose this fight. He gets that knockout, and now he's, his last fight he was like a ridiculously high favorite. His next fight he's going to be a high favorite. Like suddenly he's the killer of the division.
Right. And they booked him. They rebooked him quickly, and they've rebooked him again quickly because he won his next fight. So now he's fighting again quickly in 2021. So that's all you got to do is make the brass happy.
Yeah, I don't blame him. I mean, like, I don't know how long his 15 minutes of fame is going to last, but try to squeeze as much as you can in both from the UFC and him. Like, do it because we've seen crazy things. We've seen Anthony Pettis with the Showtime kick and all things. If you're not out there, people will forget. So
that's true.
Get out there as much as you can.
Right. I mean, even if he's remembered as the guy that did that kick, it doesn't matter. He's still a guy that people are remembering. So let's go from knockout now to submission of the year. There's a couple that stick out in my mind. I might have missed a couple here. The most recent one was Jimmy Flick. That crazy head kick into a flying triangle, I think, is definitely up there. I think Khabib Nurmagomedov's triangle choke of Justin Gaethje, just from the pure technical standpoint, I think that was one of the best of the year. AJ McKee and Bellator, that was one people were talking about for a long time. So I don't know if I missed any. I know you did your research. What did you have as your submission of the year?
Well, the three you mentioned are all really, really good ones, and I'm really hoping this is where we disagree on one, because this is not the one where there isn't a runaway candidate.
Sure.
I think of Vanessa Demopoulos' in like inverted triangle. I mean, it was regional one in LFA, but that's something that was very, very fun. When I think of a submission, I always think of like how rare is a submission and who was it against.
Sure.
So you kind of have two things. Now, Khabib has that beat the highest level. It was the main event of the UFC. It was for a title. It was almost, I wouldn't say a dream fight, but it was the matchup where people said Justin Gaethje is a toughest matchup, for Khabib. He gets the submission that his dad loved. He purposely set up like this. There's a backstory. But when I think about how rare something is, we've seen triangles. What AJ McKee did and who he did it against, it checks both boxes. So, and it's rare for us to go for Bellator. But what I also loved is I was tweeting for that. Like my assignment, I was tweeting for Sherdog. And it was like a lull in the action. Darren Caldwell, the NCAA wrestlers on top, AJ's on bottom. I'm tweeting like, I don't even remember what I'm tweeting, and next minute the fight's over, and I didn't know what happened. And then I see replay, and I was like, what? What was that? So do that, to a former bantamweight champion. And what I also love when I talk about rarity, like when Pitbull, kind of trash talked it a little bit, and he didn't even know what the submission was. A Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt didn't know the submission. To me, it's even more fun. And what I love is still to this day, I think some websites are calling it a modified neck crank. McKee called it a shoulder lock. Like, we're still debating what happened, which is to me is why this one will be remembered longer than the other ones.
Yeah, I think officially it went down as a neck crank, but you're right. Like I even was just like, I don't know what he did. I saw some pressure, and then I saw it, and then that was it. And you thought we were going to disagree here, and that was what I went with too. I originally actually had Habib's triangle just because of the meaning, like you were saying, the meaning behind it. It was his swan song, etc. And I was just like, that is so perfect, but McKee's submission is just like nobody knew what the hell happened, and it was and he goes, yeah, I've done that before in the gym. I was just like, done what? We don't know what you're talking about. We saw, but we didn't really see. So we have another unanimous one there on the submission of the year.
I became a fan in 1995. It was UFC 6. The debut of Tank Abbott was the first MMA I've seen. So 25 years I've been watching MMA, and I've never seen this fight. And I'm not just one of these guys who just watch the UFC pay-per-views. Obviously, I'm doing a freaking podcast right now. We watch everything, and I've never seen this submission before.
Yeah, no, that was unbelievable. And I was like you. I was just like, what happened? Did he? I didn't know what happened, honestly. Then I had to go back and watch the replay, and I was like, he did something. I just don't know what.
You know what I thought happened? I thought it was a freak injury at first. I thought it was Remember when Josh Barnett was against Mirko Krokop and he was on top, and then suddenly he started, he broke his collarbone. Something freaky happened. I'm going way back in the Pride days.
Right.
I thought that like something happened to his collarbone when AJ McKee just kind of adjusted his body. I thought it was just one of these freak things. I'm like, oh no, not to end that way. I'm with you on that too, and that's why I said, I'm like, is he injured? Was there a foul? I didn't know what happened. But all right, moving on. So we could. I mean, this one's gonna be another one we probably agree. This is the craziest show. If you watched any of the previous shows we talked on, you and I were usually at each other's throats. But breakout fighter of the year. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to nominate anybody other than the next guy. Is Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, how do you go against anybody else here? Well, I mean, Derek Holland would be a solid choice.
Kevin Holland.
Sorry, Kevin Holland. I'm thinking about baseball. Kevin Holland would have been a solid choice. 5-0 and all that. But July 15th is when Khamzat Chimaev debuted in the UFC. That's a 6 months. So 6 months in the UFC, he went from majority of fans, other than the most hardcore, knowing who he is, to going 3-0, having the quickest turnaround in history. But not only did he go 3-0, but I want to read you the total strikes and significant strikes. His first fight, 124 significant strikes to total strikes to 2. Significant strikes 43-1. That was against John Phillips. Reese McKee, 68 total strikes to 0. 40 significant to 0. Gerald Mershot, 4 total strikes, 4 significant strikes. Gerald Mershot, 0. I'm looking at the math. It is something like, it's over 200. It's 200 plus, 220 or so to 2 in total strikes. It's like 90, almost 100 to 1 in significant strikes. So the domination was incredible. We didn't mention it, but his KO of Gerald Mershot is a short list of knockouts of the year.
Yeah, it's probably top 10, top 15
but
for sure.
What really got me for him is to be in the UFC 6 months, and then he was scheduled to take on what's his name?
Leon Edwards.
Leon Edwards in the last card of the year. In a 6 month stretch, he was going to headline a card that had Jose Aldo on it. It had Stephen Thompson,
Marlon
Moraes, Greg Hardy, like big names, or at least guys who, Jose Aldo, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And he was going to headline over those guys, and he made his debut in the UFC 6 months ago. He is the definition of a break. Because a breakout doesn't always necessarily mean like who you beat, what you beat. It's just when He went from not a star to sitting next to Dana White.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like, listen, like, when he got signed on that late notice to fight on Fight Island, he on MMA Intel, my website, we had him ranked as the number 22 welterweight prospect in the world. Obviously, we were a little underrating him there, putting him at number 22. But he'd only had 6 fights at that point. They were all, I believe, in the Scandinavian region, and he'd had a couple of decent fighters, but there just wasn't a whole lot on him. He was like, yeah, this guy's clearly talented. But what's going to happen when he steps up? Now, I wasn't completely on the train. Like, I was like, this guy's impressive, but he beat up John Phillips, which it's not hard to beat him if you have a wrestling background or half a wrestling background or went to a wrestling class when you were in, 5th grade. He beat up Reese McKee, who was a late notice fighter who, in my opinion, was not ready to be in the UFC when they signed him. He just was in the right place at the right time. So when they gave him that Mearschart fight, I said, okay, this is a good test because Gerald's tough. He's well-rounded. Is he ever going to be a UFC champion? No. But he's a good test. He's a good guy to gauge where Chimaev's going to be. And he beat him so quickly when didn't even have to use his wrestling. I'm just like, okay, this guy is for real. This is the guy and I think Front Row Brian said it best. I think he has a very John Jones aura about him, in terms of his talent and how special of a fighter he is.
You know what's crazy? While you were talking, I went over to shout out to bestfightodds.com. I went over there to see what the lines were. This guy debuted, we keep mentioning, he debuted 6 months ago, and in 6 months, his best win is Gerald Mearschart, but he's almost right now a 2-1 favorite over Leon Edwards, who's a top 5 welterweight in the world, who's on a huge winning streak, beating good guys. And Chimaev's almost a 2-1 favorite. That is breakout candidate.
And if you were looking at the lines before that fight got pulled from that last card of the year, I mean, yeah, he was a pretty sizable favorite over Leon, no doubt about that. So I mean, yeah, we are completely in unison. I'm hoping we can break apart here for Coach/Gym of the Year. Now, the reason I combined these, as I said to Keith before, was generally if they separate these, the gym and the coach end up winning regardless because he kind of runs the gym in the first place. Some of the ones that that were thrown around, Sanford MMA, Fortis MMA, American Top Team, City Kickboxing. So Keith, if there's one I didn't say that you think is the gym / coach of the year, go for it. Otherwise, what do you have?
So this was a tough one because to me, nobody really jumps out. Like it wasn't, and I think a lot of that has to do with just lack of cards, and we have big months off. We had so many international fighters that just was not eligible to fight. Just a weird year, but despite all that, I'm still going to go with City Kickboxing for one reason and one reason only, is they went 3-0 in UFC title fights this year. Mm-hmm. I know Alex Volkanovski, people say, well, he's kind of part-time in City Kickboxing. Fine, whatever. But Israel Adesanya went 2-0 in the year, and Alexander Volkanovski went 1-0. 3-0 in UFC title fights, yeah, that's my team.
Yeah, and I mean, and think about the other fighters that fought as well. I mean, Carlos Olberg is City Kickboxing. He won on the Contender Series in a main event, got a UFC contract. Brad Riddell had a great year. He's one of their pride and joy. So, I mean, even outside the title fights, I agree with you. Outside the title fights, City Kickboxing and Eugene Behrman had a big year, in a year where maybe they weren't having as many fighters get as many reps in the cage, and they still stood out. I mean, and that's that. And you said it was it wasn't really a standout. I actually thought that American Top Team had a fantastic year this year, and I thought Sanford MMA continues to be super underrated with how many quality guys they're putting in the big leagues and they're having success. So we continue to agree. Why don't we head over to the next one? We have Broadcast Analyst of the Year. Now, I'm not going to drop any names here, just so maybe I'm not accidentally hinting you. I have my person in mind. So who do you think was the Broadcast Analyst of the Year, or who are a few nominees you have in your head, and then who would you take?
So one thing I do when I don't really bash commentators often. I don't really bash analysts. I definitely, and I'm thinking this more on people on TV who's broadcasted. I'm not talking about journalists and writers. Yeah. I'm thinking strictly people working a fight broadcast, just so people know. Yeah, I know. I saw Fighters Only magazine gave it to Daniel Cormier, which I get it because of the detail show he does, but to me, there's only one guy who fought and commentated in a week span. To me, that's absolutely incredible. So I'm going Paul Felder as I'm a fan of Paul Felder. He works so many things. He's a top 10 or so ranked fighter in the world, and then to cut weight, take a fight, go 25 minutes, and then commentate the next event, to me is absolutely incredible. So I know I probably shouldn't be giving him credit for the fighting because that's not really part of the broadcasting part. But to me, that's the one broadcaster that just comes to my mind. So I'll give him that.
Yeah, this show is far more boring than I thought it would be. I thought people were going to think that you and I were yelling at each other. Yeah, Felder, for the reason you said, taking a fight and commentating the next week, using his platform to yell at guys for cutting weight, even though he had to cut weight in less than a week. I think that, but it all comes down to this. When I'm watching a fight card and Paul Felder's commentating, I tend to enjoy those fight cards more because I actually really enjoy his commentary. I think his his analysis skills are very good, and he doesn't babble, and he doesn't, and it's a very professional. Like sometimes a couple of those guys kind of get off the rails, and that's fine, because it is what it is. But when Felder's in the booth, I know I'm going to really enjoy watching the fight. And getting some some fact or some knowledge coming from him and being like I'll walk away from a fight card being like, oh, I learned something like watching and hearing Paul Felder say something, but there's other good ones too, and I always get shit for saying I love Joe Rogan. I don't care what anybody says. Joe Rogan's awesome, but yeah, Paul Felder is clearly, in my opinion, the broadcast analyst of the year, 100%. All right, the story of the year, and this is again going to be pretty much one thing here. Obviously COVID/Fight Island, that whole scenario. I think Khabib's retirement was a huge story that is going to be overlooked most likely. Keith, is it just COVID Fight Island? Is that the story of the year?
Yeah, I mean, that's a story in any sport. That's a story in just the world, regardless of, we've had some pretty big things happen in 2020. Nothing stops COVID. And regardless if you think, the UFC should have had shows, shouldn't have had shows, regardless of what you think about that, it was still a major story. Either way, you're on the fence. And for the UFC and MMA in general to go from a sport that was once looked down upon, that wasn't that long ago, was actually banned from TV, to suddenly be the first major sport to come back, a major organization to come back, to lead the way. And at one time, MMA was the most popular sport in the world. Sure, it was only for like a month, but that was it. And that's incredible. And Dana White made some bold claims, whether you agree with his claims, I'm not getting into the science and all that, and the doctors and all that, but it is a major accomplishment or a major thing they did. So that is, to me, out of everything we've talked about, this is obviously the most easiest.
Yeah, and I agree. And what I will do is I'll get you a little pissed off right now. Going back to our old show, I always forget what it's called. I remember you saying that this was the UFC's chance to go mainstream, and they should start showing all their cards on ESPN and mainstream TV. And I said I think this is a great chance for them to make big pay-per-view numbers, and I think I was right. A lot of pay-per-view records were broken this year, and they were making more money on pay-per-view than they were before. Here's the thing. They did it safely. People can say all they want that there were a lot of fighters that ended up getting COVID. And I said, yeah, but none of those fighters died. As far as I know, they didn't have any, symptoms that had them on their deathbed. They did things, as safely as they could. They got fighters paid, and that's all that mattered at the end of the day, because these people this is their job. If they can't work, they can't make a living. They got families too. And, I will go out of my way to slam the MMA media. I loved Dana White's video that he posted on Twitter. They were the MMA media, the Luke Thomases and all these jabronis saying that, oh, we can't do this. This is too dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, all the fighters are saying, I want to fight. It's like the media is telling me, no, you can't fight. It's like, you're not going to be the one that's in the cage. They were the ones willing to take the risk. They were the ones that wanted to make their living. Dana made that a possibility. Fight Island made it possible for so many international fighters to make a paycheck. And in the UFC Vegas shows, being able to have a controlled atmosphere in the UFC Apex and all those American fighters that were able to come in. And I've spoken to fighters who fought on those Apex cards, and they said it was the most, it was the most organized, safe environment that they could have done it in, and they all give props to the UFC for that. I really don't think you'll find too many fighters that are employed by the UFC that weren't very pleased with the job that the company did this year.
Well, we are going to finally disagree because I've been pretty on the side of let's have shows. I love MMA. I'm not a doctor. People figure it out, whatever. That said, I'll go to my grave saying that the MMA will always be a niche sport until they get on a major network at a normal time. It's not normal the Super Bowl. Think about the NFL, which Sunday Night Football, they start at, I think Monday Night Football starts at 8:15. The fourth quarter is at, 11 o'clock maybe a little bit earlier. The Super Bowl realizes that that's even late and moves up to 6:30 on the East Coast.
Yeah.
6 o'clock on the East Coast. Until MMA realizes that they lose so many fans by starting late, by causing huge, prices. Until they get on major, NBC, Fox, the regular, all their events, I still think it's gonna. I still think they blew an opportunity. I think they made a short term payday when they could have made a much bigger long term one.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but there is going to be a card on ABC in January, from what I'm hearing. I believe it's the not the Holloway Cater fight. I believe that's going to be on ABC, so that's a step forward. And I know you just said that if they make it on Fox, they were on Fox before, albeit not as often as they should have been, in my opinion.
But they put they put like the Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos was the first one we went, and then it became glorified. There was fight night cards,
right.
What I want is the biggest stars. I want to see Israel Adesanya which normally be a pay-per-view, be on 9 o'clock start time, main card start time, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Fighting at 10:30.
You'll never get an argument with me on time. I was loving those 7 Central start time cards, the ESPN Plus cards. It was so much better than the 9 o'clock start time in the Central time, which is 10, isn't it? It's 10 o'clock for you, so that's even worse.
It's 10 o'clock, yeah. There's some that were ending after 1 o'clock.
Oh, I know, yeah. And then the pacing on some of them, it's just it's like you're getting you're getting 2 fights every hour and a half, and it's just can we move this along? No argument for me there. Definitely. So now let's go to our predictions. I'm going to skip regional promotion of the year because we've agreed on literally everything so far. So maybe we'll disagree on here. So first, let's talk about who will be the UFC champion by the end of 2021 in each division. We'll try to do this rapid fire, and if we have a disagreement, obviously we'll stop there and explore. So we'll start off at heavyweight. I had taken John Jones as the heavyweight champion by the end of 2021. I think he will likely take on Stipe Miocic in Stipe's next fight. I think he beats him. He'll defend it once or twice, get a felony, get arrested, and then drop the belt.
So I wasn't really prepared to make predictions, but just so some of these I'm going to throw off the top of my head. But dude, you're not going to find John Jones. The decline is there. You can see it, which to me is the perfect time to move where speed is less of a thing. It's more of a power. I think John Jones is a bad stylistic matchup for Stipe Miocic. I think he's a bad stylistic matchup for a lot of the guys in that division. So I will be in agreement, and I will take John Jones to also win the title.
Excellent. So then we head to the light heavyweight division. We have a newly minted champion, Jan Blachowicz. Does Blachowicz hold it to the end of 2021? I will say yes. I know he's going to be he's rumored to fight Izzy. It's going to be a light heavyweight where Blachowicz hits a lot hard. He's going to be hitting a lot harder than middleweights. And he's got very good stand-up. So I think that Blachowicz will beat Izzy Adesanya in that fight. And I just don't see a lot of challenge coming from him in that division as of right now until there's some new blood that kind of works its way up.
Well, so I have a guy I want to pick that I would pick right now to beat Jan Blachowicz. I just don't know if he'll get the opportunity.
Oh, lay him out.
But this is the guy that if you've listened to the recaps, both me and Ben Duffy have been pumping up. I'm going to go Alexander Rakic. I'm high on this guy. He's got all the tools. That's who I'm going to go with. I think he owns the title one day.
Yeah, and he's got a fight. I can't think of it off the top of my head. He's got a fight scheduled right now. Is it? I can't remember. It might be. I don't remember. But yeah, he's definitely a talented guy. That guy I thought you were going to say was going to be Yuri Prochazka because that's a guy that a lot of people have mentioned as well. Yeah, interesting. That's definitely a long shot though. But if he can get a win or two, he could definitely get a challenge with there. Now for middleweight, we mentioned Izzy Adesanya. I think he'll hold the belt next year. What are your thoughts on the middleweight?
Um, yeah, I'm huge on Izzy. His striking is insane. I'm gonna go. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, not much analyst there, and there's not a lot left in that division for him, unfortunately. Welterweight, currently the champion Kamaru Usman, he has a fight scheduled with Gilbert Burns. Does Usman hold on to it to the end of the year? I will say yes. I actually think that he beats Burns in a somewhat easy. I think people really underestimate Usman for some reason, but I think he beats Burns in a somewhat competitive fight, but I think he retains and he'll win one or two more fights to close the year out.
You know what? This is not going to be a popular pick. Usman, like, I'm at like 51, 49 on whether he sustains. He almost lost to Colby Covington. That fight was so close. I'm going to double down. I picked Colby Covington to beat him last time. I think Covington's going to win the title.
That would be a definitely interesting one, and you wouldn't hear the end of it, that's for sure. So the lightweight belt, very unsure right now.
Oh, hey, can I interrupt you? Can I actually change my pick at light heavyweight?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I was like, Rakic. No, there's actually a guy I like in the division even more, but he probably has an even further road to getting a title shot. But the guy who I think might be the best is Magomed Ankalaev. That's who I think can win the title. So that. I'm going to change my pick to Magomed Ankalaev.
That's a good pick, and I don't think next year, but I think in the future he could be there. Now the lightweight title, which is where we're moving to, it's weird because Khabib retired as the champion. Now the belt's vacant. We don't know who's going to be fighting for the vacant title. There's talks that maybe McGregor Poirier might become for the vacant title. I would be okay with that. So, right now I do have Conor McGregor and in 2021 as the lightweight champion. Do you disagree with that?
I really want to pick Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira is a tough stylistic matchup for Conor.
I agree.
I don't think the rest of the division is.
So I think you're right.
I don't know if Charles Oliveira has the drawing power in such a sexy division. I could see Conor being the champion and suddenly Nate Diaz gets his trilogy fight instead of someone who deserves it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when you told me we were going to make a prediction, I was going to make one prediction. And my prediction was Conor McGregor's the 2021 Fighter of the Year. That was my prediction, which is kind of ironic because I used to be called a Conor hater, and then I'm like when people call me oh, you hate Conor, and then the other people say oh, you're such a fanboy for Conor. That's when I know I analyze them right when I break them down for a fight and I get both comments at me. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I think Conor starches Dustin Poirier. Now
I agree.
This is tape study, so I always like to say that pre-tape study. I might change my pick, but when I do my breakdowns, what I always like to do is I like to write 12, 13 fights. I always write down who I think's going to win, and then see if my tape study changes. Right now, I have Conor very confident he knocks out Dustin Poirier.
I agree with you. And that's coming from a guy. So I got raked over the coals by taking Poirier in their first fight, and I never lived that one down. Well,
at the time, there was so many question marks about Conor McGregor. I mean, there's still question marks about him, but especially at that time.
Right, yeah, especially when he was smaller time before he had really gotten in there with a top 5 dude. So featherweight, this is the interesting one because I'm a huge Volkanovski fan, but it's hard to not take Brian Ortega with how great he looked in his last fight and just how dangerous he is all over the place. So I have my featherweight champion by the end of the year being Brian Ortega.
Yeah, this one's really, really, really tough. Yeah, to me, it's down to those two guys. Brian Ortega had a eye-opening moment, but you know what? We've counted out Alex Volkanovski before. I'm going to say he does it again. I'd say at the end of the year, he's still a champion.
Yeah, I'm one of the few guys that took him in both fights with Holloway. So I just thought he was the right guy at the right time.
I took him in the rematch, but I'll admit it, I did not take. I thought Holloway was going to piece him up in the first fight.
I was one of the few in the media that actually
Yeah,
took
very few.
Volkanovski.
Very. I'll
Believe
give you
me, I
credit for
know.
that. There's not
Yeah,
many
believe
people.
me, I know. I was, oh, what the fuck you not going to take Holloway? I'm just like, I think Volkanovski's got his number.
Well, we used to do that show, the All Angles, which is a deep breakdown, and I was like, oh man, Volkanovski's got so many great skills. I broke it out, and then I watched Holloway, and I was like, oh dude, there's just levels, and boy was I wrong.
I think a lot of people were, so you can't feel too bad about that. So let's go to bantamweight. This is probably the toughest one in my opinion, based on one of the predictions I'll make at the end of the show. I am going to stick with Peter Yan. I think he beats Aljamain Sterling and wins the belt, and then I think he'll hold it till 2021. But I also was very close to saying if Dillashaw wins a fight or two, he could definitely be right there and get that belt back. I'll go with Yan for right now, though.
All right, so pre-tape study, I am actually going to take Aljamain Sterling over Jan, but I'll go bold just for fun. And I always like to say, I always say this because I'm a little bit of a coward. I always want to throw out pre-tape study. I might change my opinion, so don't hold me to opinion in December if I pick him in September. The other guy, I'm going to say Aljamain Sterling beats Jan, loses the title to TJ Dillashaw sometime in the summertime, and then near the end of the year, October, November, December, that range, the Triple C comes back and beats Dillashaw again, and Triple C is the champion once again.
So you stole my prediction for the end of the year. That was going to be the last thing we did on the show, but yeah, definitely. Flyweight, do you still have Davison Figueiredo as the champion at the end of the year?
I do.
Yeah, okay, me too. We've talked enough about him today, so we'll just leave it at that. So there's technically 4 women's titles, but we'll talk about 3 here. The women's featherweight / bantamweight, I don't think Amanda Nunes is losing anytime soon.
I think she gives up the title.
Really? To who?
I don't know who she gives it up to. I think she just vacates it. And the future champion, I'll go bold again, is Kayla Harrison.
Do you think she'll be in the UFC by the end of the year? Because she is going to be in the PFL, which probably runs till, I believe, October or November.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I know she has that thing where she's fighting, they're letting her fight out. So, yeah, that's a good point. So, that should be more 2022.
That'll be 2022.
Yeah, that's a good call. So, yeah, everyone else in the division stinks. So, I say maybe Amanda Nunes doesn't keep it.
The division of 4 people.
Yeah, I say Amanda Nunes keeps it, and I'll double down at 135.
For sure. Yeah, same here. Women's flyweight, I don't think anybody in that division beats Shevchenko, and I think, honestly, the only woman that beats her at this point is Nunes.
Yeah, I agree.
And then finally, women's strawweight. We didn't see a lot of her this year, but Weili Zhang, I will stick with her this year as well.
Yeah, I want to take Tatiana Suarez, but who knows? She might never come back. So
yeah.
She just has that Cain Velasquez feel where I think it's going to stop being more reputation than actual results, which is sad because she looks so incredibly talented.
So I definitely would take. I have said when she gets back, she is going to be the champion, but we don't know when she's coming back, and that's what's sad because she really is one of the most talented ladies out there. And I think she would ragdoll Weili Zhang for 5 rounds.
Yeah, and we're talking about a back injury and just a slew of injuries. Like, she might not be the same fighter when she comes back. I mean, we've seen. Yeah, I remember. Say what you want about Tito Ortiz and the level of competition of that, but when he had neck surgery and back surgery, he was never the same fighter.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm with you. I think Weili probably still keeps the title.
All right, so we agreed on some of them and disagreed on a few others. So that's good that the fans didn't just hear us, agreeing with each other all night because they're not used to that. Now, like we said, we'll do predictions here and then we'll sign out. You kind of stole my prediction so far. I said Henry Cejudo will return and he probably will win. I think he'll fight up at bantamweight. I don't think he wants to cut down to 25 anymore. I think he'll cut to bantamweight and he'll win a fight or two. That's my big prediction. I have others, but why don't you give me a prediction of yours?
Well, I don't know if it's bold enough, but I still think Conor McGregor, when I'm saying he's going to win the 2021 Fighter of the Year. As far as a bold, I thought Colby Covington winning the title was pretty bold.
That's definitely. I think that's covered under the championship talk there.
Yeah. As far as something bold, Man, you put me on the spot. I'm not really.
Well, I'll ask you a couple
Go ahead.
questions,
Go ahead.
things I thought of.
Sure.
Do you think Bellator is losing steam because they weren't able to put on as many shows this year? Do you think the gap widens between the UFC and Bellator?
I don't. I actually think it's the opposite.
Oh,
I
really?
actually think Bellator has made some good decisions. I think going to, and I'll shout out Nolan King. I did not think it was a good decision at the time. He was right. I was wrong. I think the Thursday thing works.
Yeah.
I kind of called out Scott Coker in the press conference about the late start with the. I thought they lost a little bit with the Ilimile McFarland thing. Being the fight started so late, but they said that's a rare thing. It's not supposed to be. That's supposed to be 7, 8 o'clock start times. I think that's good. I think owning a night like Thursday night is good. Yeah. Not competing with the weekend, stuff like that. I think that's smart, decisions on their part.
I actually agree with you on that. I think that weekday cards are actually a good thing, especially when I was thinking of was like especially during like when football season was really the only thing going on, like slash like kind of the baseball playoffs, and there wasn't something on every night. Throwing a random card on a Wednesday or Thursday, and then that's one of the reasons I think the Contender Series is so popular because it's on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I also think that Bellator is doing, and I don't think they get enough credit for this, is they're really developing young talent.
Yep.
And they do, the UFC lets the talent that they're interested in kind of simmer on the regional scene, then maybe an Ultimate Fighter or the Contender Series. And the Bellator is the opposite. They get ahead of the crowd. They're signing those NCAA's champions right now. They're signing anybody that has even a remote interest. I mean, they signed that chick who beat up the big fat guy. Like, anybody that can make you tune in, they get them. They have the little bit of the freak show stuff. They got the little bit of like, why do I care? Like, with your Jake Hagers, and then they grab some of the old stars. But they're kind of really balancing out their roster. And another thing that's happened that I really hope continues is in 2020, because they didn't have arenas, they didn't have to sell out crowds, they didn't have to try to get the local people in there. We didn't get their prelims loaded with like. I don't want to say local talent because I like local talent. I mean just anybody.
Local fighters.
Yeah, you're fighting in Connecticut. Okay, let's go get some guy from Connecticut with a 0-1 record who will sell 100 tickets to his friends. No, they're all the way through the roster. There was reason between their matchmaking. You had either the guy get brought in against the prospect they want to get over. So like there's a lot of things they're doing that I think might even be closing the gap. And the Grand Prix are popular. Like, I love the Grand Prix. I think that's a great thing. And I've said it for a while. I'm doubling down. Bellator has always needed to face a star. And AJ McKee could be that guy. He's got the look. He's got the personality. He's got the fighting style. And if he can win the Grand Prix, particularly against Pitbull, like he needs Pitbull to make it to the finals, which I don't think is a done deal as everyone else thinks it is. People forget how close Emmanuel Sanchez's first fight was.
Yep.
But if Pitbull can get in, you have a legend, probably the best fighter in Bellator history. If he could put on a performance like that, that could be a stardom moment for AJ McKee.
Absolutely, and I'll give, and I already gave my one prediction on the Adam Hunter show and the Phil Daru episode about how I think that with the lack of attendance, I actually think we'll have some attendance back by June or July. I think, in my opinion. But if they continue to have non-attendance shows, I actually think that the TV cards will be stronger than the pay-per-views because what they'll do is they'll take 1 or 2 really good fights at the top of the pay-per-view and then 3 like fight night level cards because the pay-per-views have been selling like hotcakes and they no longer have to draw the arenas because there's no people there. So I think that they're actually going to be willing to put more, which you kind of saw in that last card of the year on ESPN Plus, I believe it was. Which was a loaded card, right? Yeah, which was a loaded card, but because they didn't have an obligation to fill up an arena, they're like, all right, well, we're going to get a decent amount of TV revenue and TV cash because it's a good card, and we don't have to worry about selling out the venue. So I've said that 3 shows in a row now. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I know some of that. The end of the year was they had to get guys who were obligated to get fights by the end of the year, so they kind of had to get some stars. But one thing you see, and I've said this for years, I've never understood why they stack a McGregor card when he's going to sell no matter what. When you have your star, you don't need to stack. What you need to do is your co-main events need to be the guy you want to get over.
Correct.
Like Shemaev in a co-main event on a Conor card, or or a Kevin Holland, someone that you think can make that next step up. Like that's who you need to feature on, you know, your McGregor cards. And
Right,
those
right.
big
And if
stars.
you're trying to get that that mainstream appeal, even though you already have Connor, throw Greg Hardy on there, because then even if it's not a Connor guy, it's like, oh, that fucking NFL Pro Bowler is fighting as well. You put
Yeah.
him in a main event. Does he deserve a co-main event
No,
slot? No,
of
but
course not.
he's a name, and that's all that matters.
As far as so, I'll give you a prediction. You talked about you want a prediction. I'll say the UFC would be the first one to hold a large attendance crowd in America. So
I agree with
not
that.
your small football, a couple hundred people. I mean, I feel like Dana wants to be it, whether it be in Texas, whether it be in Florida, somewhere where they have a packed out arena. Everyone in media, I'm not going to call people's names out like you did, but everyone in media is going crazy saying, oh my God, this is so dangerous. And Dana doesn't care.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. I think it will be in Texas too. That's my prediction. It'll be the first live, full, like big attendance show will be in Texas. I agree. I agree. It'll be the UFC though.
I was thinking about this, and I feel like we've been saying his name so much, but having Conor return with nobody in attendance, like that's going to be weird. Because who draws the pump from the crowd, whether pro or con, like Conor does, and it's a guy who feeds off the crowd too.
Right. That's what sucks though, is having Conor come back without a crowd. Definitely, 100% true. All right, Keith. Well, we have spent almost an hour here discussing these awards, these predictions. It was some interesting stuff. Not as interesting as when you and I bicker and call each other names and all that stuff, but it was great. So, Keith, why don't you plug yourself, whore yourself out, go for it.
All right. So, I mean, the only thing I got to plug is continue to check out Loudmouth MMA, where we continue pumping out shows, including the Shoot and Shit podcast, which Riley does, the breakdown shows that I do, the recap shows. A lot of that stuff in 2021, I'm going to try to get on more on YouTube with our partnership with Sherdog Radio Network, hopefully on their YouTube page. So continue to check out the stuff me and Ben does, our recaps, our predictions, and then obviously I would have more of my Dana White Contender Series breakdowns when they come out. So check those stuff out.
Absolutely. I'll continue to whore myself out as well. Like you said, Loudmouth MMA podcast. We're there every week. Don't have any guests lined up for the new year yet, but haven't really been talking to anybody yet. I had the technical issues that pushed this show back a little bit as well. You also get this show simulcasted on Combat Press. Shout out to Rob Tatum and Brian Henderson, who continue to host that show on their platform. And obviously check out my personal Twitter at Big Riles MMA, my Facebook, which is under my name. I post shows on there and content there as well, including my recently released 5 prospects per division the UFC should sign in 2021. Already one person off the list on there. So that won't be the last, obviously. So, Keith, again, thank you for coming on the show, man. It was good stuff, and it's good catching up with you. It has been a while since we've done a show together, so appreciate you coming on. So for Keith Shillan, I'm Riley Kontek, closing out 2020, saying continue to watch the fights, continue watching this show, and go fuck yourselves. Good night.